Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all our witnesses. Mr. Cuccinelli, I wanted to ask you, because I thought your testimony was very striking in the context of EPA's recent proposals to expand its authority under the Clean Water Act. I know you follow this. I'm sure you've heard the statements from the administrator, which basically are saying, this is clarification of existing law. This is no big deal. I'm curious, what's your gut reaction to that, having lived through the Accutink experience and litigation and the sort of position EPA took in that instance?
Well, I don't think by any means it's limited to that instance. One of the institutional problems you have is that the EPA, whatever grant of authority is provided, always overreaches it. I literally cannot, I don't know of an example, and I don't think a person in this room could name an example, where Congress set out some grant of authority to the EPA and they didn't actively at some point thereafter look to push the outer envelope of that and to do it. I mean, the Judge O'Grady's ruling in our case was not appealed, which is rather unusual for EPA. I mean, they're tenacious fighters. And to not appeal tells you just how swamping that ruling was. In about 20 years of litigating, and I was the lead attorney on that case. I argued the case, litigated alongside the Board of Supervisors of Fairfax. I can't remember a judge's order where I wouldn't change a sentence. And it was that powerful. The judge was so overwhelmed with what EPA was trying to do. And they clearly stated, this is experimental, and if we can do it here, we're going to take it everywhere. Now understand, the Accutink is been around a long time. We're the oldest part of America here in Virginia. And I brought with me one sentence from George Washington's diary from 1772. Set off for Williamsburg, but not able to cross Accutink, which was much swelled by the late rains, I was obliged to return home again. That was when he was a member of the House of Burgesses, now the House of Delegates. And this isn't a new problem in our part of the state. My cautionary warning to you all is that when you don't already have control, and by you I mean the legislative branch, over the aggressiveness and extent of the reach of this rogue agency, to grant it more power and authority is an extremely dangerous thing. And I'll just use one example from other testimony. It was glossed over a little bit. The cost difference between taking greater care to deal with stormwater as you build new facilities versus the radically dramatic impacts and costs of retrofitting, the order of magnitude is extraordinary, and the impacts on jobs are not positive, they're negative. If they were positive, Milton Friedman's old comment about building the Panama Canal, digging the Panama Canal with spoons would make sense because there'd be a lot more jobs. We're talking about destroying businesses in the one single case that I talked to you about in Virginia, and evicting families who'd lived in their homes for decades. Even in a transient community like Northern Virginia, these were old middle-class neighborhoods, and so older folks live there, inevitably people more often displaced, and they're going to be not merely put out, but the economy around them is going to be harmed. This is an economic negative overall, and unless you categorically, hermetically seal the EPA and only let them deal with this going forward on new projects, then you're going to have an agency that's going to run amok, and your local governments are going to be coming back to you and saying, why is the EPA at the table for local land use?
Great point. And Mr. Medina, to come directly off that, because it does allude to your comment, I want to make sure I understood it and underscore it. It is true that in terms of cost effectiveness, it's a different planet, whether you're talking about starting from scratch on a new project versus retrofitting existing infrastructure. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's correct, Senator. And that happens everywhere in anything that we have to do, right? It is cheaper for us to eat healthy
Right.
and maintain our bodies than have a quadruple bypass, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Right.
However, one important thing that we need to keep in mind is that we can do things wisely and correctly if we wait for the right opportunity. We don't have to spend all these millions of dollars ripping up roads.
Right.
Those roads will come up for rehabilitation at some point in their useful lives. That is the time when we can say, we did things wrong, we got a second chance here to do it right, we're going to apply the principles that we know now are useful.
And you also mentioned the different experience in other countries. I think in many of those cases, there's a big difference structurally between here and there, because their agencies with the authority to come up with these solutions are usually the ones paying for it. Here, it's fundamentally different because the EPA is almost never paying for it, and therefore has no practical limit in terms of the sort of mandates and solutions it tries to impose on either private owners or local jurisdictions. Isn't that a big difference?
That may be so, but the cost still has to be borne by somebody. So if we have environmental degradation, somebody's going to have to pay for that, whether it's an agency or a private landowner. It just doesn't go away. If we don't do things right from the beginning, somebody's going to have to dish out the dollars or the pound sterling to do that.
And to go back to the distinction between completely ripping up or retrofitting an existing infrastructure versus when you're building something new, certainly I think everybody would agree, EPA is seeking more authority in this area across the board, not just new projects, not just brand new planning. Is that correct?
I don't know the details of that. I know that from the point of view of a professional, what makes sense from the point of view of technical expertise and financial soundness is to wait for the right opportunity to do those things right.
Right. Thank you.